Hi, everybody. Today, what we're going to focus on are some effective techniques for learning and then applying that learning to your work in the class so that you can demonstrate your mastery of material. One of the most common questions that I get from students is, how should I study for this class? And what I want to talk about today is generally how we think about learning, the process of learning, and then some tips and tricks for making sure that you're learning as effectively as possible. So before we can start thinking about tips and tricks for learning, the first thing that we have to think about is levels of cognitive demand and how much activity and effort attaining those different levels of cognitive demand require. So what you're seeing here on this screen is something called Bloom's taxonomy. The basic idea of Bloom's taxonomy is that it's a hierarchy of tasks associated with understanding and learning that increase in difficulty as you go up that pyramid. So at the very bottom, we've got basic remembering. This is the ability to memorize facts and then recall them as they're given to you. This is really the lowest level of cognitive demand because it is just basic information recall. If I ask you to tell me the definition of evolution, you can give it back to me word for word. Moving up from remembering is understanding. Understanding is not just being able to recall what those facts are, but being able to explain what they mean. So being able to say them in your own words. Instead of just giving me my definition for evolution back word for word, being able to say it in a way that is correct and is in your own words. Moving up from understanding, we get to a harder level, which is application. Application is taking that information that you understand and being able to use it in novel scenarios. So can you take that definition of evolution that you've provided and use it to determine whether or not a population is or is not evolving? Analyzing is getting a little bit harder. So it's looking at data and evaluating what that data means in the context of broader concepts to understand what we can take from that data in the context of knowledge that you've previously gained. Moving up from analyzing is evaluating. So essentially being able to judge the quality of information, the quality of ideas. So if I give you two different methods for assessing a problem, you can tell me which method would be superior given the context for the study that's being discussed. The very highest level of Bloom's taxonomy is creation. This is where you take previous knowledge and understanding and combine that knowledge and understanding in novel ways to make something that is your own unique creation. This is really what we're talking about when we think about doing science, things like your animal behavior research project, where you are creating a novel question, a novel hypothesis, and a novel experimental design to answer a brand new question that is your own. So when we think about Bloom's taxonomy and the way that these different levels of cognitive demand relate to one another, it's really like building a house on a strong foundation. The only way you can get to a higher level of cognitive demand, like evaluation or creation, is by making sure that you have a firm foundation of those lowest cognitive levels of remembering and understanding. Now, for our class, I'm pretty much never going to ask you a question that's basic memorization. So when you get to a lecture quiz or a midterm, I'm never going to say, give me the definition of evolution. When we think about why I'm not going to do that, that's because that's a really low level of cognitive demand that's not consistent with what we're trying to do in college level biology courses. When we think about remembering and understanding, oftentimes those are the levels of cognitive demand that your high school level courses have focused on. So can you be given information and then recall at a later point? The fact that all of you are already in college and that you've made it here to OSU tells me that you're already capable memorizers and understanders. I know that because you're here, you're already good at recalling information and probably even pretty good at being able to put it into your own words. What we want to do in college level biology courses is take those skills you already have in understanding and remembering, and then build on them to focus on application, analysis, and evaluation, and especially in the lab portion on this class, creation. So what I want to do is help you think about ways that you can make sure you're building those key foundational levels of remembering and understanding so that you can more effectively apply, analyze, and evaluate. So let's start with those bottom tier level skills, remembering and understanding. So the first step is to make sure that you can do basic recall. I know that this is an old school kind of suggestion, but it works really effectively for basic recall. 4 key ideas and key terms. One of the best ways that you can help yourself remember those key terms is with basic flashcards. If a term is bolded, if it's a key idea from our lecture slides, make a flashcard where you put that term on one side and the word perfect definition on the other side. Don't go 80% on definitions, because being most of the way there is oftentimes not good enough when we move into higher level problem solving. When you make those flashcards, I have 2 recommendations for how to study them. First, read the definition and make sure you can recall the term. If you don't recall the term on your first try, put it back in that card deck and keep on practicing until you can go through perfectly every single time. Once you've mastered recalling the terms, up your level of difficulty. Instead of looking at the definition side of the cards, look at the term side, and then see if you can give that word perfect definition back. And again, reshuffle those cards back in until you are word perfect on those definitions every single time. Once you've got that definition down pat, move on to understanding. Can you paraphrase the definitions that I've provided for you in the slides without losing key content? That helps you get to that understanding level. So on those little flashcards, on the definition side, can you paraphrase that definition and make sure that it still retains the key content? Once you've established those key foundational levels of learning, remembering and understanding, then you're ready to get into applying and analyzing. And for that, I recommend that you use some of the tools that are already built into the class. You have tons of examples of practice questions between top hat questions, lecture quizzes, your weekly midterm practices, your weekly lecture reviews. All of those are extremely effective study tools if you use them correctly. So the way that I like to suggest that you use those pre-existing study tools is that you use them to test your ability to use that information to explain why each answer option is either wrong or right. So when we think about going back to top hat midterm practice lecture reviews, lecture quizzes, it is not helpful for you to just find the right answer again. That's going to make sure that you're familiar with content, but familiarity is not what we're looking for here. We're looking for understanding. We're looking for mastery. So when we think about looking for that right answer, probably because you've done the questions before, you're probably going to be able to find the right answer without ever actively engaging with the material just because you sort of remember it from before. We want to avoid falling into the familiarity trap where you mistake familiarity for mastery. So to avoid that familiarity trap, what you're going to do instead, when you look at each answer option, you're going to either write down or force yourself to say aloud why that answer option is correct or how it is inconsistent with your understanding of the material. If you find you cannot say why an answer is wrong or right, then you've just identified a gap in your knowledge, which is an incredibly important thing to be able to do. When you identify those knowledge gaps, what that lets you do is go back to your notes, go back to the recordings or the lecture slides, and fill in that gap of knowledge so that you've now supplemented your understanding so that it's more complete. If you can state why every answer option is right or wrong, that means that you're capable of applying your knowledge to novel situations and analyzing the content of that information to come up with why it is correct or incorrect. This is a really effective study tool that's akin to teaching yourself or teaching another person the content. And critically, like I said, it helps you self-assess gaps in your own knowledge. Assessing gaps in your understanding is one of the hardest things we can do as learners, because how do you know what you don't know? This is a really effective tool for letting you identify those gaps. Now, again, I do really recommend that you force yourself to either say your explanation out loud or physically write it down. A lot of times, if we don't force ourselves to do that more in-depth description of why answers are right or wrong, we fall into that familiarity trap where you're like, oh yeah, I know why that's right or wrong. But forcing yourself to say it ensures that that's actually true. Once you've got those analyzing and applying bits down, at that point, you're ready to think about evaluating and creating. Typically on our higher level assessments like lecture quizzes, midterms, and the final, I'm mostly going to be assessing you at the application and analysis phase and a little bit on evaluation when we get into assessing methods, particularly toward the end of the semester. So again, making sure that you can explain the criteria you're using to evaluate the pros and cons of different methods or decision-making paradigms is really what we're going for there. So those are some of the most effective study methods that I think you can use for this class. And then of course, remember that I am always available to you as a study tool, right? So you can come to my office hours. You never need an appointment. It is literally free tutoring services with the person who makes your assessments and teaches the course. So what better resource could there be? You are always welcome to email me. You are always welcome to come up before or after class. You are always welcome to come to my office hours. I'm here to help you learn as effectively as you can. So please just pick up the tools that I'm providing for you to learn and help me help you use them. So hopefully this has been a helpful little guide to studying. And as always, please let me know if I can help. I will see you all in class later on. Everybody have a good day till then. I'll see you all then.